Moscow warns of nuclear clash risk. The West's involvement in the Ukraine conflict could lead to catastrophic consequences, Russia's deputy foreign minister has said. Washington's efforts to add fuel to the Ukraine conflict could potentially trigger a direct nuclear standoff, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned on Thursday. Speaking on the sidelines of the Geneva Conference on Disarmament, Ryabkov said the most acute strategic threat comes from the policies of the US and NATO, which seek to further stoke the conflict in Ukraine and tensions around it which they deliberately initiated. Against this backdrop, the senior diplomat warned that the increased involvement of the US and NATO in hostilities was fraught with the threat of a direct military clash of nuclear powers with catastrophic consequences. Ryabkov said Moscow had alerted Western countries about these risks but that its warnings are being distorted for propaganda purposes and deliberately misinterpreted. He went on to add that such policies are at odds with nuclear states' declaration that a nuclear conflict should never be fought. In January 2022, in a rare display of unity, 5 nuclear powers, Russia, China, the US, UK, and France, issued a joint statement saying that they consider the avoidance of war between nuclear weapon states and the reduction of strategic risks as their foremost responsibilities. The diplomat added that the destructive actions by the US and its allies are fomenting tension in several regions across the world, which suggests that we can talk about the growing global struggle for a new world order, Ryabkov added. All of these developments make it harder and harder to deal with arms control and strategic risk reduction, according to Ryabkov. His comments come after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced last month that Moscow would suspend its participation in the New START Treaty, the last remaining nuclear deal between Russia and the US, which puts restrictions on the number of nuclear assets deployed by the two sides around the world. Explaining the reason for the move, Putin said that the West had denied under formal pretexts Moscow's requests to inspect Western nuclear facilities in accordance with the treaty. At the same time, he noted that NATO countries were demanding access to Russia's strategic facilities. Earlier this week, Anatoly Antonov, Russia's ambassador to the US, said that Washington must reconsider its hostile anti-Russian policy to create conditions for a return to full-scale operation of New START. Ukraine conflict, day 372, Russia on brink of Bakhmut victory. Russia vows to bolster border defenses. Russia said on Friday it would take measures to prevent new border incursions, a day after accusing Ukraine-backed nationalists of killing 2 people in a cross-border raid in southern Russia. President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday Russia had been hit by a terrorist attack in the southern Bryansk region bordering Ukraine, and vowed to crush what he said was a Ukrainian sabotage group that had fired at civilians. A Ukrainian presidential advisor accused Russia of staging the incident as a false provocation to justify aggression against Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters on Friday that additional measures were being taken to protect the border. Of course, yesterday's terrorist attack will be investigated and measures will be taken to prevent similar events in the future, he said. The FSB security service released video and photos of Thursday's incident showing 2 shot-up cars with their drivers slumped dead inside. Putin was due to hold a regular meeting of his Security Council later on Friday. Russian boy praised for saving 2 minors in Ukrainian attack. The governor of Bryansk region has proposed awarding the child a medal for courage for saving the girls, despite having been shot in the chest. A 10-year-old boy from Russia's Bryansk region is being hailed as a hero after he managed to save the lives of 2 first-graders during an attack by Ukrainian saboteurs on Thursday. According to local media reports, Fyodor and 2 girls, Zlata and Lena, were being driven to school by their neighbor, a 63-year-old man known as Uncle Lenya, on the morning of March 2nd. On their way they encountered a group of armed men. After realizing that the men were not Russian servicemen, the driver attempted to turn the car around and flee, but the Ukrainian operatives opened fire on the vehicle, killing the driver on the spot and wounding Fyodor in the chest. Despite being shot, Fyodor managed to pull the girls out of the car and escape the scene. Fedaya fighter told us go to the forest, one of the first graders told the Moskovsky Komsomolets outlet. I was there, in that car. I saw people in white uniforms and one in green. Fedaya showed us where to go and we ran together, she said. Fighter and the girls eventually made it out of the area and were able to catch a ride to the nearby settlement of Novorovsk, where the boy was taken to the hospital. Doctors managed to extract a NATO-issue bullet from his chest. Doctors say Fighter's condition is stable and that he is expected to make a full recovery. Bryansk Governor Alexander Bakhmut paid a personal visit to Fighter on Friday and commended him on his bravery. Despite being so young, he acted like a real man, like a true fighter, Bakhmut wrote on his Telegram channel. The governor has announced that documents are currently being prepared to award him with a medal for courage. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also stated on Friday that everyone in the Kremlin and the president are in awe of the heroism of the boy and the man Uncle Lenya, and announced that their actions will be officially noted. The Ukrainian operatives who crossed into Russia's Bryansk region on Thursday have since been forced back to Ukrainian territory and hit with a massive artillery strike, the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, said. Nobel Prize winner sentenced to 10 years. Ales Bilyutsky was accused of smuggling cash and fomenting civil unrest in Belarus. A Belarusian court has sentenced Nobel Peace Prize winner Ales Bilyutsky to 10 years in prison on cash smuggling and breach of public order charges. Friday's sentence came as part of a major case against members of the Vesna, Spring, Human Rights Center. In addition to the 60-year-old Bilyutsky, lengthy terms were imposed on 3 other activists. All of the accused deny any wrongdoing. According to Belarusian prosecutors, members of the human rights group cashed out hundreds of thousands of dollars in Lithuania between 2016 and 2021, after receiving the money from various foreign organizations. The funds were then moved across the border without being declared, the prosecution insisted. The defendants were also said to have aided participants in anti-government protests in Belarus between 2020 and 2021, while financing the unrest under the guise of human rights and charity activities. At the time, thousands of Belarusian citizens took to the streets to protest against incumbent leader Alexander Lukashenko's victory in the presidential election. As well as serving 10 years in a high-security prison colony, Bilyutsky was ordered to pay a fine of 185,000 Belarusian rubles, $73,000. Bilyutsky has served time in prison in the past. In 2011, he was sentenced to 4.5 years on tax evasion charges after allegedly storing money in foreign banks. The activist insisted that the funds in question did not belong to him. Bilyutsky was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last October, along with the Russian and Ukrainian human rights groups Memorial and the Center for Civil Liberties. The Nobel Committee said that the laureates had for many years promoted the right to criticize power and protect the fundamental rights of citizens.
Russian nuclear plant guards fired on, official. The incident reportedly happened as the IAEA rotated personnel at Europe's biggest atomic facility. Russian security guards came under fire while overseeing the changing of UN observers at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant on Thursday, a senior Russian official has reported. He described the incident as a Ukrainian provocation. 2 unarmed security personnel came under intensive assault rifle fire, Rinat Karchat, an advisor at Russian national nuclear operator Rosener Godom, said in an interview on Friday. Sometime later a Ukrainian machine gun went off. It was targeted by fire, and it's a miracle that our 2 security staff survived, he added. The official claimed that even Ukrainian troops who were accompanying experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, across the front line seemed surprised by the incident. Karchat described the event as demonstrating that the situation is absolutely out of control in this area. The transfer location was moved some 300 meters by the Union at the last minute, Karchat reported, adding that Russian personnel found and disarmed 7 booby traps as they walked that distance. The IAEA mission at Europe's largest nuclear power plant was due to rotate its staff weeks ago, but managed to do so only at the 4th attempt. The head of the agency, Rafael Grossi, praised the successful transfer, calling the presence of inspectors indispensable to help reduce the risk of a nuclear accident amid the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Karcha blamed the Safety and Security Department of the UN Technical Secretariat for the delays, saying it repeatedly invented excuses for not going ahead with the rotation. First they cited intensive fighting in the area, which did not happen. Then there was the non-existent mining by Russia, he told a TV news program. UN security officials likely took at face value what they were told by the Ukrainian side, Karcha stated, alleging that Kiev actually has no interest in nuclear safety and is using the situation at the Zaporozhye plant as a tool of manipulation of public opinion. In its statement on the rotation, the IAEA said that a key power line necessary for the site's safety was recently damaged by shelling on the other side of the Dnieper River. Karcha said it is absolutely clear who is shooting from where. Toxic blame game, who's responsible for East Palestine's Mini-Chernobyl. A month has passed since the February 3rd train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, enough time for the massive plume of toxic smoke caused by the controlled burn of several rail cars' worth of chemicals to dissipate and for details of the accident to filter through. What happened? Who's to blame? Some of the answers may be surprising. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine provided an update on the cleanup operation in and around East Palestine earlier this week, expressing appreciation for local residents' hearty can-do attitude in dealing with the emergency. I just want to say that I continue to be impressed by the resiliency of the people in the village, by their attitude, and how many people are pitching in to really make a difference every single day, not just in the community but outside of the community, DeWine said. Standing alongside representatives from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and other state and federal officials Wednesday, we had the chance to watch really almost all of the operations going on today, and again I was impressed by the magnitude of it, and also impressed by the hard work that so many people are doing to make sure this is a community that is in fact safe and does in fact remain safe, DeWine added. Empty feel-good sentiments aside, the governor was light on the hard facts about what's being done to mitigate the disaster. Earlier in the week, DeWine's office reported that approximately 4,832 cubic yards of contaminated soil had been removed from the ground by Norfolk Southern, the Atlanta-based rail giant whose train derailed in East Palestine on February 3rd. Incidentally, that same 4,832 cubic yard figure was mentioned by the governor last week, even as the railroad and officials continue to assure that cleanup operations are ongoing. DeWine has taken heavy flack for his role in the disaster, particularly over his and Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's decision to sign off on Norfolk Southern's proposed controlled burn of the toxic chemicals on board the derailed freight cars, instead of carefully and thoroughly removing them from the disaster area via tanker trucks. The railway said the derailed cars posed an explosive hazard, and to mitigate this danger, rigged them with explosives and sent millions of pounds of chemicals into the skies over the town on February 6th. Residents in a 2-mile area were ordered to leave their homes and evacuate, but were told just 2 days later, on February 8th, that they could safely return home. East Palestine residents reportedly suffering from chemical bronchitis after train derailment. What was on the train? The train's load included industrial chemicals used to make products like rubber, paint, and household synthetic polymers known as polyvinyl chloride, PVC, including vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethyl hexyl acrylate, ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, and isobutylene. Many of these chemicals have been linked to cancers, respiratory illnesses, and neurological and behavioral disorders. Despite the danger posed by these substances, DeWine, Shapiro, Norfolk Southern, the Environmental Protection Agency, and others insist that air quality in and around the town remains normal, and that air and ground pollution testing has been extensive. However, town residents, independent reporters, and people from nearby communities have told another story, reporting to anyone who will listen on the death of their pets, birds, farm animals and local wildlife, and the contamination of rivers and streams. On February 28th, one independent journalist spotted 3 dead deer on the banks of Little Beaver Creek, almost 25 kilometers south of East Palestine, speculating that the animals may have died from drinking contaminated water. U.S. legacy media have attempted to smear those sounding the alarm about the potential scale of the environmental disaster in East Palestine as right-wing crazies. How a train derailment in East Palestine turned into a right-wing cause, Jeff Bezos-owned newspaper The Washington Post opined in a feature February 24th, attacking conservatives for criticizing the Biden administration for its half-hearted response. In fog of East Palestine's crisis, politicians write their own stories, the New York Times wrote the same day, accusing far-right podcasts, conservative celebrities, and House lawmaker Marjorie Taylor Greene of spreading conspiracy theories after Greene tweeted that East Palestine was in the middle of an ecological disaster because authorities blew up the train derailment cars carrying hazardous chemicals and press are being arrested for trying to tell the story. The NYT didn't clarify what part of MTG's tweet constituted a conspiracy theory. A News Nation reporter named Evan Lambert was indeed arrested in February for speaking loudly and getting into a heated conversation with the National Guardsman while DeWine was addressing other reporters at one of his press conferences. The charges against him were soon dropped. Who's to blame? The National Transportation Safety Board released a preliminary report on the East Palestine disaster last week, focusing on the derailment, but crucially, not the controlled burn or its consequences, which investigators promised to study at a later date. The federal agency also stressed that it is not involved in air monitoring, testing of water quality, environmental remediation, or evacuation orders, and referred any questions on those matters to the EPA. In essence, the report boiled down to recounting what everyone already knows, that 38 railcars of a 149-car train derailed, among them 11 carrying hazardous materials. In a press conference accompanying the report, NTSB Chairwoman Jennifer Homendy intimated that the February 3rd incident was preventable, because we've never seen an accident that isn't preventable. Our job is to determine how this happened and issue safety recommendations to prevent this one from happening again, she said. Like DeWine, Homendy remained light on details. And so when it comes to prevention, it could be actions on the railroad's part for maybe not having more conservative policies on thresholds. Or it could be some sort of problem with the wheel bearing that could have been addressed earlier. Those are just examples. We don't know that yet. Rail Company. While state and federal authorities and much of the media have shied away from blaming Norfolk Southern directly for the decision to burn the chemicals off instead of removing them, residents of East Palestine have had no qualms about pointing the finger at those they believe are responsible. You know, their main concern was to get the rail line open so they could move freight. That's all they care about, Bob Figley, owner of a local hardware store, said in an interview with independent media. When the guy from Norfolk Southern came on right after it happened to talk about their plans, the first thought that came out of his mouth was, they're going to get this all cleaned and opened up and the tracks down and get the trains running. There was no talk about, well, we are going to find out what people need. You know, people were thrown out of their houses and they couldn't stay there. But I haven't seen anybody from Norfolk Southern come in and say, hey, you know, how has this affected you financially? Here's a check. I believe the controlled burn shouldn't have happened, Tim, a lifelong resident of East Palestine, said in the same report. I believe that it would cost the railroad more to pump that liquid off and haul it away. It would have cost them more money and it would have cost them more in time. They should never have released more of that chemical into the atmosphere and into the air we breathe. The railroad benefits from it because they're saving time and money. And I believe that's why they've done the controlled burn. It gets them back on the rails faster, and it doesn't help anybody around here. It had to benefit the railroad to do it that way. Because it's not going to benefit our wildlife, our domestic animals, the people that breathe the air, the water, the soil. It just made it worse. The EPA announced earlier this week that Norfolk Southern representatives would be forced to attend a town hall gathering on Thursday after the railroad ducked out of a similar event held in mid-February, citing a growing physical threat to our employees. However, Norfolk Southern CEO Alan Shaw skipped Thursday's event, sparking outrage from locals, some of whom shouted, "Where's Alan?" Residents implored the railroad to hear their plight. "It's not safe here. I'm begging you, by the grace of God, please get our people out of here," one man said. "If I did something wrong, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to face my wrong. And I'm just one simple human being, they're a corporation," an outraged woman added.